Recently, This is America and the World visited Malaysia. The country sits south of Thailand and north of Singapore and uniquely consists of two distinct landmasses. The west part of the country is called Peninsula Malaysia, and across the South China Sea is East Malaysia, located on the island of Borneo. Malaysia is a peaceful country and a success story. Its population of 30 million people is racially, ethnically, and religiously diverse. Perhaps not as well known in America as it could be and should be, Malaysia's international status cannot be denied. On this program, in the capital city of Kuala Lumpur, I speak with U.S. Ambassador Joseph Yoon, a Korean American who introduces us to Malaysia and explains its importance in the region and in the world. This is America visits Malaysia. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. Tourism Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your hospitality.
Well, thank you very much, coming all the way to Kuala Lumpur.
What should Americans know about Malaysia?
Malaysia is a fascinating country. As you know, historically, it occupies really central place in Southeast Asia. What is more interesting about that is there are a lot of similarities with America. For example, I don't know whether you've seen the Malaysian flag. They kind of look similar.
Yes.
You know? And that is because when they had a competition for Malaysian flag, someone had very much in mind the states, the stars, and so they kind of got that. And so it is a multi-ethnic society with Malays, Chinese, and Indians. And it was multi-ethnic for a long time. And also, there's multi-religion. Malays tend to be Muslims, of course. There are some Christians, quite a lot of Christians among Chinese. And of course, the Indians tend to be Hindus or Buddhists. So it's a country of melting pot. And they've made a huge success of it. Per capita income in Malaysia is about $10,000. You will see outside KL, very developed city, Twin Towers, which is one of the tallest buildings in all of Asia, if not the world, and good infrastructure, good roads. It's also a great place for tourism, both in Peninsular Malaysia and Borneo part of Malaysia, which is Sabah and Sarawak. So a lot of interesting history, melting pot, and so it's a great country to be here.
When you say melting pot, they use that expression all the time in America. Can we learn from how Malaysia has done it?
Well, I think Malaysia, I mean, again, it is a different model of political system and cultural system, because here you have what we call Malays or Bumi Putra. Bumi Putra literally translates into sons of soil. A big majority, 65%, with Indians about 10%, and with Chinese about 25%. So it's more of a three ethnic group country. While, you know, I myself am Korean American, while US, you really have every nationality. And so there are things we can learn from each other. And I think here there is more of separateness among ethnic groups than I would say in the US. And I think there is less of integration. And so I think there are lessons in both. And certainly I always talk, when I talk in Malaysia, compare what the American experience is as a melting pot compared to Malaysian experience as a melting pot. And you see a lot of Malays having good friends in the Chinese community and vice versa. So I would say they get along.
This is a big year for Malaysia, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking of ASEAN chair, President Obama's visit to come, UN Security Council chair, non-permanent chair. Talk a little bit about why that focus is so important.
Well, ASEAN is the Association of Southeast East Nations, and it's made out of 10 countries. And Malaysia is a founding member. So this really is a grouping that is becoming more united. You know, economically, it wants to have a single market. Politically, it wants to have more relations with each other. And also, diplomatically, it wants to approach the outside world more united and more together with consensus. So it's a very, I would say, ASEAN has been there a long time, but more recently, it's becoming more powerful, more influential. So for example, they are negotiating with China on how countries should behave, even though they have disputes in maritime space. So that's called Code of Conduct. So they want to provide a unified ASEAN position on that. They're opening markets as an ASEAN. So at the end of this year, they will declare what's known as ASEAN Economic Community. And that provides lower tariffs, better investment climate for each other, more common standard. So that will all be helpful. And this is also why we're very much interested in having better relations with ASEAN. Really, you know, that developed over the, I would say, last 6-7 years. We now have an embassy in ASEAN mission in Jakarta, because ASEAN Secretariat is there. So in Jakarta, we now have 2 ambassadors, one for Indonesia, one for ASEAN. And as you mentioned, President Obama will be coming back to KL in November for the summit with ASEAN countries as well as other member states in East Asia, what we call East Asia Summit. He was here last year in April, just over a year ago. So very lucky to have 2 visits by US President in 2 years. Before that, the last time American president was here was Lyndon Johnson in 1966, I believe.
Whoa. So now the focus by his visit will be here once again.
There will be a lot of focus
on the region?
In the region as well as on Malaysia, yes.
Malaysia. You referred to your own background, and you are very experienced, personally and professionally, in Asia. What surprises you about Malaysia? Surprises you?
Well, there are a couple of things that surprised me, even though I thought I was relatively well prepared, you know, when I came here. One actually was the importance in Malaysia of the royalty, sultans. There are 9 sultans in Malaysia, and each of them takes a turn to be king, 5 years. So among 9, one will be king. And there are very important roles as keeper of the religion, and which means also stability, and also someone they look up, and ultimately also for stability reasons. And so the role of sultan is not well I certainly did not understand it, but once you come here, you begin to understand that sultans and royalty have a strong role, quite an influential role. Second thing that surprised me was the level of development. If you travel outside, they have great roads. This weekend, I was in Penang, which is about 200 miles. And I was able to get there in 4 hours, quite comfortably in a car. And there you see 2 bridges from mainland to Penang Island, and which is just, long, long bridges, maybe 10 kilometers, the new one. And so level of development is quite advanced.
You look around KL, as you say, Kuala Lumpur, and the buildings that are going on here, the growth, is it too much too soon? Are people paying attention to the environment, the sustainability as well?
I think that's an important issue. I mean, certainly, in East Asia, we've seen very rapid growth. You've seen in Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, and also now you're seeing it in countries like Vietnam, and even beyond that, Malaysia and so on. And it is very rapid clip. Malaysia is probably growing at about 7% a year, but still, it needs to grow that much to provide jobs for really young people who are entering labor market. Also, outside big cities, development is not as strong. So it really does need high level of growth, much higher than what we are used to at home, which would be 2 to 3%. It needs to grow beyond 6% to really keep the pace and provide jobs for younger people.
It's an economic success story, Malaysia. Clearly an economic success story. But I'm thinking so often, and maybe you'll be the one that can answer the question, why is Malaysia not as well known as it should be?
That's a tough question. I think it is quite well known in Europe, for example. In Britain, Malaysia is very well known.
Because of the background,
of the
history?
Historical background. Mm-hmm. And even places like Western Europe, it is quite well known. It is somewhat less known in the United States because we've not had the traditional big relationship that we've had with countries like Philippines or Thailand, Korea, and Japan, and so on. But I would say, it is becoming better known. But I agree with you. I would like to see Malaysia promote itself through tourism, through trade, through education, a lot more with the U.S.
But that's where your job comes in.
That is absolutely my job.
That's your role as ambassador, to promote these areas. Daily activity. I know you've been busy earlier today with some local media. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, with the local media, I met 3 of them to do separate interviews on something that happened yesterday in Washington. That is, we issued our annual Trafficking in Persons report. And as you know, the modern day slavery is a real problem. And it is a problem in Malaysia too. Malaysia is a country of 30 million people. At any given time, there are probably more than 5-6 million foreign workers. So imagine that. There's a huge amount of foreign workers. They mostly come from Myanmar, from Bangladesh, as well as Indonesia, Nepal, and so on. That's because this is somewhat more prosperous than these countries, so it has drawn them in. So when you have that many foreign labor, you're going to get forced labor. That is, there will be victims. There will be traffickers who are taking advantage of them. And so it's been a problem for a long time. And so last year, Malaysia was ranked in what we call tier, that is grade for trafficking, in tier 3. This year, because Malaysian government has been more active in combating trafficking, they have improved a little bit to what we call tier 2 watch list. However, a lot of work remains to be done. And so I was explaining to local media what that's all about.
Mm-hmm. When they talk about trafficking, the implication in many people's minds is sexual. But when you talk, it seems to be industrial. A big piece of the pie are just workers.
Yeah.
Is that it?
There are both sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking.
Labor trafficking. Yeah.
By far the greater number in Malaysia is labor trafficking. These are workers who come to work in plantations here, mm-hmm. also as well as in electronic sector assembling, as well as in any basic industry. Construction is one, catering is another one. And so what typically happens is that there will be labor recruiters who go to these countries like Myanmar or Bangladesh and say, we have jobs here, but we will transport you here. And in order to do that, you must give us some upfront money. And once they come here, they have to pay back that debt, and that is so difficult to do. Sure. And so they become, essentially, they cannot, they are confined, they have to work, they have no freedom of movement. So I would say that's the biggest part of trafficking in people problem in Malaysia. Mm.
The relationship between the United States and Malaysia, perhaps not as important as some other Asian countries. How would you characterize the relationship? What are the common interests, concerns?
I would put, this relationship issue in number of different segments. Certainly, we have very strong economic relationship. Malaysia has always been a trading country. And as a result, we trade a lot with Malaysia. And second, there are a lot of American companies who made big investment here. One reason I went to Penang was that a lot of American electronic companies, they've been here 30, 40 years. Motorola was there many years ago, Texas Instrument, Western Digital, all these companies have plants there. And so that investment has been very important. So economically, we've always had a great relationship with Malaysia. I would also say on security side, they have relied on us. We have a lot of military programs here, including joint training. Last year alone, we did joint training in all services, Navy, Air Force, Army. So we do work very closely on the military side. Now, on political side, it's been a little bit of up and down. Malaysia has always pride itself being a key member of non-aligned movement. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they have been critical of us on what we do in the Middle East. Because it's a Muslim country, they're very critical on what we do vis-a-vis Israel, Palestine. So that has not been as easy. But again, over the last few years, I think we've developed a relationship where Washington has put in a lot more investment, especially in high-level engagement. As you mentioned, the president will be here. Next week, Secretary Kerry is here. Mm-hmm. So we're doing a lot in terms of high-level engagement to bring Malaysia in to be a real partner in both regionally as well as outside the region.
So many good things happening in Malaysia, yet within the country there is trouble, huh?
Well, it depends how, every country has trouble within the country.
Yes, we know back home. Yes.
Domestic politics is always a problem, and of course this is not an exception. Now you have what is called parliamentary system. So unlike many countries in the region, there's never been a military coup here. They've always had an elected government here, and it's always been, with the current ruling party and ruling coalition always at the center. Now, obviously, when you compete for votes, when you compete for community, it's going to get into friction, and this is the case here. They are now, having a kind of, I would say, squabble, both with the opposition as well as within the party. So, who knows what will happen, but it's always interesting to watch.
And be on the outside of
be on the out, far rather be on the outside than inside.
Yes. Talk about Asia for just a minute.
Sure.
If you look at the world and you look at Asia, you say peaceful. Yet there are conflicts, there are tensions. You've mentioned China. How do you see it?
I mean, the reality is that we work quite closely with China, of course. We have huge amount of high-level engagement, trade. I mean, look at the amount of Chinese students in the US. So this is, to use a kind of overused phrase, multifaceted relationship with China. But at the same time, we compete with China. We work with China and we cooperate with China. We also compete with China. And we compete with them, in terms of influence. We also compete with them in terms of, trade and investment. And so that is the reality of Asia today. I would say, not just because we're in Asia, but this will define relationship between US and China, will define diplomacy and strategic challenges of 21st century.
Coming to the end of our time together, TPP, important for Malaysia, important for the United States, important for the region.
It is very important. So I'm delighted that in the US, we have gotten Trade Promotion Authority.
Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Right. And so TPP, like any trade agreement, is a political issue in every country. It was a case in Washington. It is a case in Washington. It is a case in Malaysia. Because when you open up your market, there will be some segment that may not benefit. And so there will be segments that may be displaced. But the overall gains are quite big. Now, we have done calculations, actually not we, but independent think tanks. IIE is one of them, that's in Washington, has done the calculation that of all the 12 countries in TPP, the number one beneficiary is Vietnam. Number two beneficiary is Malaysia. And that's, it kind of makes sense if you look at it, because if you are less developed, as more developed countries open up market, you are going to benefit more. So this really is an important trade agreement that will open many sectors to US exports and US investment, that will provide rules for labor, rules for environment, and rules for protection of intellectual property. So this is really a great, what we call high standard trade agreement that will provide a framework on how we trade, how we invest with each other. Okay?
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much
okay?
for our conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Special thanks to the staff of the Shangri-La Hotel in Kuala Lumpur. For information about This Is America and the World and to watch all of our programs, visit our website thisisamerica.net and look for us on Facebook and Twitter. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. Tourism Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.